Hello and welcome to Your Excellent Health Service TV. I'm joined by Jean Castonguay, who's President and CEO of NeuroTracker. Sounds like rocket science, but what is it, Jean?
Well, in fact, we're a mental gymnastic that helps to train focus and attention.
Right. And how does that help us on a practical basis?
Well, in fact, firstly, I must say that this technology was developed in a scientific laboratory at the University of Montreal in Canada, where we're from, with 20 years of research. And we've now developed it, brought it to market in the last 8 years. And we've started with elite performance. Our number one client was Manchester United. And in fact, in 2010, we spent 4 months in their gym developing it for their, developing a cognitive training program for their premier team. And this was in the good years when they were winning a lot. So I guess the relevance to you and your question is that this applies to the whole human spectrum. So it's not just for elite performance, but it's for active aging, it's for wellness. And then of course it also deals with rehabilitation of people that have pathologies or neural disorders.
Okay, well, let's look at the presentation you brought in, because that should hopefully clear everything up. So your path to improvement.
Well, you know, the idea here is to motivate people with engagement. Part of a wellness program implies that you get involved. So this is an intervention or a training. We call it mental gymnastics. And the purpose is that if you do this exercise, you're going to improve your cognitive capacity. One of the beauties of our body is that although with age you get a bit of muscle atrophy or bone mass density drop, your brain won't shrink if you train it. The principles of neuroplasticity show that even the elderly can grow their brain's neural pathways as much as a young person can. So there's hope for my generation.
I mean, well, I'm sure there is. Is the other point that with this it's a bit of a prevention is better than cure, in the sense that you want to like assess how good or bad you are ahead of time, so that if you're 50, you might be worried about getting older, but you don't really care that much. You assess yourself before time, when it's easier to do something about it.
Absolutely. It's like golf. You better start playing it young so that you can play it when you're older. It indeed is a training exercise that you can start at any time, because you can grow these brain neural pathways that you've got at any time. But it is good to start and know, because we can tell if there's a problem or not. But the earlier you do this, you're really preventing or slowing down the regression that you have naturally through aging.
Okay, well, let's have a look at who uses NeuroTracker. It seems to be quite worldwide.
Well, we started we're a science company, not a technology company, so we needed to validate the technologies in various markets. We've been focusing on performance because there's a need for performance enhancement in sports and in military, but we're also very much in vision sports for people that have disorders such as ADD or other dyslexia or autism. So we have now, I think, 600 establishments around the world that are using our product, either in a clinical environment, in a team environment, or in some personal use. We'll be launching a personal product this summer.
So this is not a product which is going to be rolled out in 10 years' time. This is actually there. It's there on the ground. It's happening now, and it's been happening for quite some time. So it's an established technology and technique.
It is, and we started with the professional version, so that we have medical specialists and sports performance specialists and coaches that use it because they understand the need. But we're now rolling out the consumer version through different platforms.
Okay, well, let's go on to the uses.
Well, the various markets, as I mentioned, our performance is very big for us. We started with Manchester United. We're with numerous English Premier teams, rugby teams around the world, American football and hockey, of course, and military applications, because your ability to perform and be cognitively alert is all the more important when you're dealing at high speeds that the sports require. But everything is relative. My 93-year-old mother has difficulty following conversations at Christmas or going shopping in a shopping mall. And for her to be able to deal with all of that better is very useful for her from a quality of life standpoint. So those are our healthy markets, if you wish. And then we deal in problems of where there's learning difficulties, for example. There's a big problem with attention deficits, and because we're training attention and focus, it has a direct impact on improving the quality of life and the educational ability of that child. So those are our big markets. The medical market is one that we're developing. As I think I mentioned a little earlier, that we have 23 published studies and over 40 ongoing studies. So as these studies get completed, we open up new applications. So we've got studies on concussion that are very prominent and about to develop, rehabilitation, spinal trauma. There's a lot of medical components. Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, these are all areas that we're currently working in.
And clearly there are going to be very big markets in the future, or they already are.
They are. I mean, there's no doubt that when we started this project and started with Manchester United in 2010, we were only thinking of performance. But today, I think there's a much greater awareness of the need for betterment and wellness to also train your brain, not just train your body, not just eat better, not just look at nutrition, but you can do things positively to help your brain.
Okay, let's go forward. What's all this about?
Well, I like to show this because it's a good indication of a human application. So this happens to be a very busy street in Hanoi, Vietnam, where there's no signalization when 6 intersections cross. And you'll see here, as you can see by the video, that the people crossing and dealing with the situation are handling it quite easily. And they're doing that because they're reading body language, they're reading motion and predicting how it's going to evolve, and they adjust their gait, their comportment accordingly, so they can seamlessly walk through. I like looking at the lady with the basket who's slowly moving and crossing the street with motorcycles zipping by her, and you can see that everybody's accommodating.
It's actually more difficult looking at it from outside and thinking that how this person's definitely going to crash into the other person than actually when you're in it.
That's correct. When you're in it, you can see how to deal because you're just moving slowly and everybody's seeing how you're moving and everybody adjusts accordingly. Now this application, if we move the slide, is also relevant. Now I've got to ask you here, Zach, what do you see?
Well, looking at it a little bit, initially I don't see anything. Then I see somebody walking.
Well, actually, you're wrong. That's not someone walking. That's just 15 light bulbs. But they're moving in a pattern that you associate with a person walking. And of course, you're right. It is light bulbs that are put on a person and filmed while he's walking. But the point of this is that you can see how few visual cues are needed for you to associate it to a particular human pattern, a particular human comportment. Now, it gets more complicated than that. This you can see as a person walking, but oh, look at that. That's a female person walking. See how the hips drop a little bit. Then you can see heavy versus light. Then you can see a nervous person versus a relaxed person. All of this your subconscious reads, and you adapt accordingly. And you either get nervous or you get relaxed based on your read of biological motion. It's something we do naturally every day, all day long.
And is that from the conscious mind or subconscious mind? What is it? It seems to be quite a deep-centered thing.
It's both. I mean, it's conscious if you're trying to react to something. Subconscious is when there's something abnormal that happens and your nervous system reacts. And so it's something abnormal. You've probably been to a horror movie, and what scares you is supernatural. Like, this is something that shouldn't happen in the real world, so it scares me. Well, if there's something sudden or brusque that happened, you might not catch it in your conscious, but your subconscious will. And your subconscious could react and become nervous.
Okay. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is the sports application you were talking about before.
Well, as I said, everything is relative. So, the need to process visual cues and read body movement, body language, applies to my mother crossing the street or in a busy mall at Christmas or listening to Christmas conversations, as it does to a professional athlete. Now, this is an interesting video clip. Ronaldo, one of the greatest athletes in the world, who did play for Manchester United before shipping off to Spain. And here he's asked to do what he does best, which is to put the ball in the net. So he will see a person run up to the ball, he'll see how the person kicks the ball, and he'll see the initiation of flight of the ball. But then they turn the lights out. And with that little bit of information, he's able to predict where that ball will go and put it in the net. So let's have a watch.
Dark! Lights!
Hey, that's one straight in the bag.
The night vision replay shows how differently Ronaldo performs. Human reaction time is about 200 milliseconds, and by 500 milliseconds, Ronaldo's subconscious has interpreted Andy's body language, worked out which direction the ball will go in, calculated its speed and trajectory, and then programmed his body to reach it at the optimum moment.
Love that.
It's almost as if they're doing maths in their head, even though they wouldn't be able to describe it to you. You could see from their performance that Ronaldo saw the first part of the ball flight information. He'd picked up information from Andy kicking the ball and was able to move his body into the correct position. This is because he's processed the information, he has experience of where the ball is likely to go, he's able to analyse all that as it's coming towards him and therefore connect successfully with the ball.
Love that.
He can make decisions this quickly and with such little information to go on, because in his subconscious he's an expert in the science involved.
And that's kind of the whole point of people training. Even though they can't train in a match environment, they can still take their experiences from the training ground, put it into practice in the match, take things from one match and utilise it in another, and even utilise things in a really strange situation like we've got here. In terms of the match, this means that instead of having to track the ball completely onto his foot, he could be scanning to see where the goalkeeper is, if there's any movement there, so he can then place his shot past where the goalkeeper might be.
It's amazing, isn't it, how precise he did that. And what it is, basically, is that he is such an expert that he can anticipate and implement it very quickly. Now, the point of showing this is that, yes, he's trained and he might be naturally inclined, but it's a skill that you can develop through the training tool of NeuroTracker.
Right, so one can almost be like Ronaldo in some aspects.
Well, we all have to aspire to greatness somehow.
Exactly, yes.
But just improving quality of life is an improvement as well.
Okay. So this is the upside of NeuroTracker.
Well, if I was to look at, how does it help wellness and how does it help maybe the aging population? I mean, when I first got involved in this and took it over to commercialize it, I was very impressed with one piece of science that compared, half of the group that did the training and half the group that didn't do the training. And there were two groups of age groups, one in the early 20s and one in the early 70s. And it found that the 20-year-olds were marginally better when they did the NeuroTracker, which meant that they could have a competitive advantage. And that's why we're involved in sports performance and elite performance. But the 70-year-olds, where they're not as good at that task because there's a bit of decline through aging, well, they actually were significantly better at the task than the 7-year-olds that didn't do the training. And that's because you can regain this capability. And what really impressed me is that those were in the 7-year-old that did the training achieved the same level as the 24-year-olds that didn't do the training, which means that there's a form of rejuvenation that occurs. And that's by rebuilding a capacity that you think you've lost, well, you can regain it. Now, how is that relevant? Well, driving. One of the biggest problems with aging is when you lose your license, you lose a form of autonomy, of independence, and consequently, the longer we can keep you driving and autonomous, the less costly it is to society, the happier you'll be, the more quality of life you'll have. So we're in the middle of doing a study now showing that there's a positive impact on driving. The first phase of the study was to show that there's a direct correlation between those that don't do well on NeuroTracker and have accidents.
What would be the other thing that you would actually, anybody who is, once you reach a certain age, you have to use NeuroTracker as a part of as a qualification for continuing with driving?
I mean, I think we'll get there one day, and we are dealing with this. Study is done in Canada and Quebec, where we're from, by the driving authority. So they're actually, yes, they could use it as a way of preventing you from driving, but it's really to enhance your ability to drive better. So it's a positive thing. Socially relevant skills include crossing the street, include being able to process all the movement in a shopping mall. So there's a lot of social benefit. One that's very significant is prevention of fall risk. Falling is one of the principal causes of death or decline of the elderly. And by being able to be more aware of your environment, you're able to cognitively deal with it. So, the common thinking today is that you must rebuild muscle mass in order for a person to get up and not fall. But there's also the fact that when you do get up, there's a huge amount of cognitive information comes up because your scene is changing. And if you can deal with that better, then you're less unstable and you'll be able to prevent risk.
So falling is a sign of cognitive failure rather than actually necessarily physical failure. It
could, yes, it is. That's the thought now, is that it could be caused by both.
Okay. So this is a bit of the science here.
Well, this is how it works. So it's a very simple exercise. You're dealing with multiple object tracking. So essentially, Zach, you're in a 3D environment, and you've got 8 balls on a screen in front of you, on your own screen, either your computer screen or your TV, and 4 of them will be indexed orange. And you've got to remember those 4. Actually, I think for the elderly, we bring it down to 2 balls out of the 8. The elite performance are 4. So we vary the time and the number of balls. They have to follow those 2 balls. They become yellow, so you've got to remember which ones they were, because there's 6 other yellow ones. And you've got to track these 2 balls for about 6 seconds. And at the end, you have to tell us which ones were the 2 that you were tracking. And then you'll get a response. And if you get it right, it goes faster. If you get it wrong, it goes slower. And this takes 6 seconds, 7 seconds, 8 seconds, and you do this 20 consecutive times. It takes about 5-6 minutes. And that's one training session. And what's amazing about this technology is that we've shown that by doing 30 5-minute training sessions, so 30 times 5 minutes of training sessions, you have a sustainable benefit in improving your cognitive capacity.
And these changes, do they stay? Do they stay permanently, or to keep sort of refreshing, or how does that work?
Zach, you've read your notes. Absolutely pertinent question. In fact, it's like anything. You've got to continue practicing it, but it's like learning to ride a bicycle. Once you've learned how to ride a bicycle, you've built the neural pathways to do that dual task, and you rarely forget it. Even if you haven't ridden a bicycle for a year or 2, and you get back on that bike, you quickly know how to do it again. You don't have to start from scratch. It's the same thing here. You're building up a network that deals with memory, it deals with processing information, it deals with processing speed, with working memory, executive function, and all of that ties together to improve your capacity. So why we ask you to continue doing it is that we keep adding dual tasks to make it more complicated. So you have to do it standing up. You do it by doing some exercise. You do it by doing some cardio task. Finally, we can add some visuals, visual cues, so that you can actually try to recognize biological motion. And so we just make it more complicated. It's also part of engagement. People need to do this. They have to find it interesting, and it has to be beneficial. So yes, it definitely has a sustainable benefit, but it's something you can continue to grow.
Okay. Why go through the process? I suppose you've already answered that.
Well, actually, people don't quite understand, how this all works. So I like to use the example of how does a decision get made? So take, for example, this mug of coffee I have in front of me. The first thing is that information, the sight of that, comes onto my retina, and my eye has to see this. And if I have visual impairment, I better put my glasses on. But then my brain has to decomplexify. So now we're dealing with a flat surface on a granulated wood. I have to understand that. So that's perception and understanding what it is. Finally, I think I can read what it is. Now I need to know what it is. So then that's my working memory is figuring all out what I see. Now I've got to correlate it back to my permanent memory and decide, well, what is that? And I know, because I've learned, that this is a mug of coffee. So then I have to ask myself, what do you do with a mug of coffee? And then I go back and say, gee, I think I could take a sip of water or coffee. So I tell my hand to pick it up. So you're going, and then I'll just pick it up and I'll have a sip, if you don't mind, a bit of coffee. The point is that that's the cycle of performance. And we don't teach expertise to recognize a coffee mug. We don't even teach the skill of picking it up, but we teach the ability to be able to see it properly. And if you can understand your situation completely without missing any information and doing it in a timely fashion, fast enough, well, then you're more apt to make the right decision. And this is how we improve performance.
Okay. These are the different parts of the brain that affect your abilities.
I mean, we don't want to get too complicated here, but you're really dealing with processing speed, information, processing it faster, using your working memory to understand what that is and how correlating it back to your knowledge, and that improves decision making. And there are other things like motor performance. This is your ability, now that you know exactly what to do, well, it's easier for you to actually do it physically. Now, basically, we should say that we're dealing with executive function and perceptual cognitive functions that apply, that you use all day long. I mean, other than sleeping and doing meditation, you're processing, multitasking all day long. Just by listening to conversation, looking at that screen, worried about the camera, how I'm being perceived. All of this is happening at the same time, and all of our system doesn't just deal with any one of those in an isolated manner, but does it all collectively at the same time, just like real life.
Okay. So you're still working on on improving the product?
We are, and we're a science company, so it's an ongoing commitment to validating in new sectors. This slide is only useful to show that, to demonstrate, for us to claim that we're actually helping the brain, we have to measure the brain. So we use QEEG and other imaging processes in order to see what the impact is of our training on the brain. And we've been able to demonstrate sustainable growth in areas of the brain, principally the frontal lobe, that deals with focus and attention and executive function. And so we've now got multiple studies done by many independent researchers that are looking at what the impact is of this intervention on pathologies such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and dementia. And as these get published, we'll be able to say, well, yes, this does help with those particular conditions. But what we do know is that it helps the healthy person sustain his capability and maintain that healthy mind that he needs for a happy life.
And presumably also, as over the years the technology's got better in the last 8 years, you can identify things, you've learned new things yourself as well.
Well, that's very true, and in fact the devices have improved dramatically. We're getting closer and closer to having very, very useful augmented reality and virtual reality devices. I mean, it's funny because when we first started with Manchester United with 3 big cameras, I think it cost us about £60,000 to put them in place, and you can get those simple cameras today for about £1,000, or even maybe £200, if I'm correct. And so the evolution of the cost of technology has dropped dramatically.
The wearable technology as well has been.
And wearables are huge. So I have here, just to give you an idea, this is a display where you put your smartphone, and then you actually can get it in 3D, and you put this in there, and then I could get you to wear this, Zach, be careful. And then you can actually see through your smartphone exactly the training that we're doing, and you can do this at any time, at any place, whenever you can do it. And so that's how the technology is evolving, and this is a very simple model, but that's getting improvement all the time.
Okay.
I mean, this is only to show that we've got numerous studies that deal with performance, and we've been extremely scientifically validated. We believe that we're the most evidence-based of any cognitive company in the world.
And presumably there's a lot of money in this, if Formula One and football and all these other sporting places, I mean, it is a billion-dollar business, isn't it?
It is, and you're right. We got pictures of some of our very elite clients. We're quite lucky in the sense that we are evidence-based, but we also have a lot of cameo clients. When we mentioned to people that we're with Red Bull Racing or with Manchester United or we're with different special forces, it has an impression that if they're using it, it must be something that works, which of course it does.
Okay, all right. NeuroTracker
is a highly effective training tool. So the way it works, as you can see on this screen, is there's 8 balls that are in your field of view. 4 of them, this is a performance model you see here, but for the aging it's only 2, get indexed in orange, and then they'll become yellow, and you must keep track of them. And then they'll move in a predictable fashion like a ball does. Most people understand the physics of movement of a ball. And then at the end of 6 seconds, you must identify which were the 2, and if you get it right, we'll give you a response. It goes faster and faster. Probably people don't recognize that because it's American football, but that's Matt Ryan, who made it to the Super Bowl this year, who's been training with us for the last 2 years.
But this also indicates that probably these skills are developed at a very young age. I mean, you either have that talent or that understanding from a very young age, or you don't. I mean, people. The average level is there, but people who are exceptional develop this at the age of 1 or 2 or something like that.
I mean, I can't really respond to that, except that it's clear that there are people that are innately better at it. And you think of a lot of great athletes that have not, before NeuroTracker was involved, they just are very good at it. You think of some football players. But what's important is that we can train it, and so you can get better at it, and that's very relevant.
And you can also copy maybe the habits of the Ronaldos, etc.
Right. Well, if you can develop that ability, then you'll be better at it as well. Okay. Now the next slide will just show you how it works. So you see here the speed of 1 is typically of a beginner who does this for the first time, maybe first 2 or 3 times, can typically achieve this speed. Now, in the performance market, when we're dealing with footballers and other athletes, when they do about 15 sessions, that's very quick, 15 sessions of 5 minutes to 6 minutes of training, they achieve this speed, which is about 3.0. So you can see that they really quickly are able to process this information much, much faster.
Okay.
So Zach, can you after looking at the camera, let them see how beautiful you are with the 3D glasses on. So look at the screen and just follow the balls and see if you can actually do the exercise. You see, it's not as difficult as it looks.
Well, obviously, I need to work on this a little bit, I think.
Thank you for doing it. Now we do. Well, this is integrating it with biometrics. Here you're actually looking at a biological motion, which we integrate. So we can integrate video and virtual reality inside the exercise to create some visual cues that the person can relate to. And next slide. I think we'll skip. So the way the program works, Zach, is that it's not a monthly subscription, it's a training program. So we want people to see and realize the benefit. So it's a 3-month package where they're doing 30 sessions minimum of training with a pre and post assessment so that they can self-assess their own benefit in their own life. And it's to create awareness and engagement. The second phase is where we add on dual tasks, physical and cognitive dual tasks, to the exercise to make it interesting and more engaging. What's relevant here is simply to say that we provide a report, so the person who's doing the training can understand and follow his progression. Now, usually this is done in the context, or often it's done in a context where you've got a specialist or a clinician who's supervising your training. He can recommend a training program for you, and he can monitor remotely your progress because you're doing this at home, and so he can then give instruction, and this is part of one of the offerings we have for the professionals.
Right, and presumably that if you have the track record or your progress over time, that gives you an incentive to keep going.
It does, and of course, we now have over 350,000 data points, so we are able to show normative baselines, to compare how you would be against another 17-year-old football player or another 70-year-old. So finally, it's now the world is moving towards biometric devices where people are more and more aware of not just their weight, but now their breathing and their heart rate and their the body temperature, so they calculate heart rate variability. And more we're moving towards devices that even I'm addicted to. So NeuroTracker is in fact a biometric measure, a physiological measure of your body performance. So we correlate now with all of these devices, and it can be just one other indicator of your human condition.
But you don't add on to devices we already have at the moment, or?
Yes, we're capable of doing that.
Right, so it really is something that will become mainstream over the next year or two, or what's your?
Well, it's interesting. We now have identified the markets that we're interested in, and the markets that are the sticky markets, if you wish, are performance and learning, because there people have a true incentive to be able to either do better in school because they've got problems, or it's in performance where they want to achieve some athletic, ambitious goal. But the wellness market is where we're the most validated. You know, the reality, and we haven't gotten into detail, but a person of a certain age loses his ability to detect biological motion up to a certain distance, and by doing our training they can bring that back to that of a normal person. So that gives them an improved quality of life, and that's probably the sector that we think is the most important in the consumer sector, wellness and active aging. So we're now just launching into that consumer market with the cloud-based products.
Okay, well, it sounds like an exciting time for your company. Jean Castonguay, President and CEO of NeuroTracker, thank you very much.
Thank you, Zach.